canyon winds carried sound in strange ways. Sometimes a man's own whistle would bounce back at him as if it belonged to someone else. Sometimes the groan of a vulture's wings overhead felt close enough to touch when the bird itself was a dark dot against the blazing sky. That afternoon, the sun was brutal, low yet heavy, baking the earth until it cracked like old leather. A drifter, lean and trail-worn, guided his horse along a narrow shelf of rock. He had no destination worth naming, only a steady gait that carried him from one patch of shade to the next, eyes sharp for trouble. It was then, between the echo of his horse's hooves, that he heard it. A cry, thin at first, like the whimper of a coyote pup, but sharper, cutting. A woman's cry. He stopped dead. The canyon swallowed sound quick, made tricks of it, could have been miles away, or just beyond the ridge. He slid from the saddle, boots crunching grit, and stood listening. Again it came, desperate, ragged, raw. His jaw tightened. Out here, men didn't just cry out unless death was at their heels. And women, well, a cry like that didn't belong to anyone still in control of their fate. He touched the horse's neck, whispering low, then started toward the sound, his long shadow spilling out across the canyon wall. The vultures circled higher. The drifter followed the cry, his boots crunching over loose shale as he climbed. The sun beat down hot as a branding iron, and sweat traced the creases of his weather-worn face. He moved with the careful pace of a man who'd walked many miles of hard country, always measuring each step against the ground beneath him. At first, he thought maybe the canyon was playing its tricks again, that maybe the cry was a ghost of the wind, bouncing through the stone walls, leading him nowhere. But then he found it. On a jut of rock, not more than 30 feet down from the ridge, a figure dangled. A rope had been lashed around a woman's wrists, binding her to a dead juniper tree that clung to the cliffside. The branches twisted, sun-bleached and brittle, as though the tree itself had given up fighting the elements. She hadn't. Her face was streaked with dirt and sunburn, her lips cracked, her eyes wide with something that lived beyond fear, desperation. She kicked weakly, her voice barely rising above the howl of the canyon winds. Help! It was more breath than word. The drifter's stomach sank. Whoever left her there hadn't meant for her to live. They'd meant for the sun to take her, or the rope to snap, and let the rocks finish the work. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the ledge and the drop below. One slip and she'd fall clean into the chasm. No chance of living through it. He took a slow breath and called down, his voice carrying steady. "Don't fight the rope. Don't thrash, you hear me?" Her head jerked at the sound of his voice. For a moment she blinked, like she wasn't sure if he was real, if she wasn't already half dead and dreaming. Then she gave the faintest nod. The drifter glanced back at his horse, waiting obedient on the ridge, then at the canyon floor far below, littered with stones sharp as butcher's knives. He wasn't one for prayer, but right then he muttered one anyway. Because saving her would mean putting his own body out over the edge. And the canyon didn't forgive mistakes. The drifter dropped to his knees at the canyon's rim, the dry grit biting into his palms as he leaned forward for a better look. The woman was still there, dangling, the ropes sawing against her wrists each time the canyon wind shifted. Every creak of that branch sounded like a death knell. Her eyes found his again, and for a heartbeat the noise of the canyon, the moaning wind, the distant echo of rocks loosening far below, went silent. It was just the two of them. A stranger staring down at a stranger, one tethered to life by a fraying rope, and the other weighing whether his bones could stand one more risk. The drifter unshouldered the length of rawhide rope coiled at his saddle. He measured its weight in his hands, fingers running the familiar ridges, as though reassurance could be found in leather. He'd used it to break horses, haul supplies, drag firewood. Never had he used it to gamble with another person's life. He secured one end to the base of a cedar that had clawed its way out of the canyon rim, testing the knot with two sharp jerks. The tree didn't shift. It was older than he was, roots buried deep where no eye could see. Strong enough, maybe. He glanced once more at the woman. Her arms trembled violently now, every muscle in them gone to fire and fatigue. The skin beneath the rope had already darkened, bruised raw. She was slipping. "Hold on," he called, his voice low but firm, steady as stone. "I'm coming down." Her head moved in the faintest shake. "You'll fall. Better me than you." He didn't wait for her to argue. He looped the rope around his waist, anchored it tight, then lowered himself onto the edge. His boots found purchase on the uneven stone, the leather scraping. The canyon opened beneath him, an endless yawning maw of shadow and sunburnt rock. The air smelled of dust and iron. Every downward step tested not only the strength of his arms, but the will of the tree behind him. He didn't dare look down at the canyon floor. He only looked at her, hanging there, swaying, her face pale against the red rock. "Keep your eyes on me," he said through clenched teeth. "Don't look below." She did as he told her, though her lips parted like she wanted to speak. No words came. Halfway down, the rope cut against his waist, burning. His shoulders screamed from the strain. The canyon wasn't kind. It pressed heat against him, made the stone slick with sweat. One wrong hold, and he'd fall, rope or not. The branch above her groaned, shifting. His chest seized at the sound. He pushed faster, boot, hairs and fingers scrabbling against the cliff face, small rocks tumbling free and clattering into the abyss. Finally he reached her, close enough to see the cracked lines at the corners of her mouth, the way her lashes stuck with grit. Her voice was nothing but a rasp. "Please." "Got you," he said. "I've got you." The rope around her wrists was tight, dug in deep. He pulled his knife from his belt, its blade dulled by years of camp chores but sharp enough. With one hand braced against the rock, the other sawed carefully at the hemp. His every breath was a prayer the branch would hold just a little longer. The fibers gave way with a sudden snap. For a sickening heartbeat, she dropped against him, her weight slamming into his chest, sending his boots skidding against the rock. His back slammed against stone. The canyon howled, wide and endless. His rope groaned against the cedar above. His arms burned with fire, but he held her. By God, he held her. Her face pressed against his shirt, hot with fear, trembling like a bird. "Don't let go." "I won't," he whispered. His jaw was locked so tight he thought his teeth might crack. With her bound arms looped around his neck, he began the climb back up. Each pull was agony, each foothold a war. The rope bit, the tree groaned, the canyon sneered with every slip of stone. His muscles shook, his breath came ragged, but he didn't stop. Step by step, inch by inch, he dragged them both upward. When at last his hand found the rim, fingers clawing over the ledge, he thought his arms might give out then and there, but some part of him, the stubborn mule-headed part that had carried him through every lonely mile of trail, flared alive. With one final heave, he threw them both onto the canyon's rim. They landed hard in the dust, tangled together. For a long moment neither moved, the only sound their lungs dragging in air, greedy and raw. Then, slowly, the drifter rolled onto his back, staring up at the blinding sky. The sun burned, but he'd never felt air sweeter. Beside him, the woman coughed, her voice shredded. But the sheer sound, it was alive. And for the first time since he'd laid eyes on her, the drifter let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She was safe, for now. The drifter lay still for a while, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a man who had walked the border of death and staggered back again. The grit clung to his skin, the canyon's heat pressing heavy on him, but he didn't care. What mattered was that she was no longer dangling over nothingness. After several breaths, he pushed himself up onto his elbows. The woman was curled on her side, wrists swollen and raw, her body trembling even though the sun beat hot overhead. She looked fragile, but not broken, not yet. He reached into his saddlebag for his canteen, shook it, and heard the hollow slosh of what little water was left. He unscrewed the cap and pressed it into her hands. Easy, he said. Small sips, or you'll make yourself sick. Her cracked lips touched the rim. She drank as though every drop was salvation, coughing halfway, but she obeyed. He eased the canteen back before she drained it all. Thank you, she rasped, her voice more breath than sound. The drifter nodded once, brushing the dust from his palms. What's your name? For a moment, silence. Her gaze slipped past him, back toward the canyon rim, as though she couldn't quite believe she was no longer hanging there. Finally, she whispered, Clara. Clara. He let the name settle in the air, rolling against the canyon's hush. It suited her, plain but strong, a name meant to endure. He tore strips from the hem of his shirt and wrapped them gently around her wrists. She winced when the cloth touched raw flesh, but she didn't pull away. Her eyes never left him, searching his weathered face, perhaps trying to decide what kind of man he was. Who tied you out here? He asked softly. Her eyes shuttered, her lips pressing together. She shook her head once, a small, stiff motion. He didn't press her, not yet. He'd learned long ago that some truths couldn't be dragged out by force. They had to be set down in their own time, like a wagon finding its path. Can you stand? He asked instead. She hesitated, then let him help her. She was lighter than he'd expected, bones and weariness wrapped in tattered fabric. She leaned heavily on his arm, every step trembling. The canyon floor stretched flat and empty, heat shimmering off the stone, offering no shade, no mercy. The drifter looked toward the horizon. His camp was a half-day's walk to the north, if they moved steady. But the way she staggered, he knew she wouldn't last that long. He thought of a wash a mile east, an old dry creek bed, but with a trickle of shade beneath the lip of the rock wall. It wasn't much, but it was closer. He whistled for his horse, the sound sharp in the stillness. The gelding came trotting over the ridge, reins dragging. The animal nickered softly at the sight of its master, then eyed Clara with wary curiosity. She won't hurt you, the drifter murmured to the horse, rubbing its nose. He lifted Clara carefully into the saddle. She swayed, clutched at the horn, but stayed upright. He walked beside, leading the horse by its reins, one steady step after another across the burning stone. The wash came into sight, its walls casting blessed strips of shade. He led her down into it, helped her from the saddle, and lowered her gently onto a flat slab of rock. The air there was cooler, a thin reprieve from the sun. Clara leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, her voice broke the silence, quiet and brittle. They said no one would come. The drifter's brow furrowed. Who said that? She shook her head again, lips pressing shut, her hands tightened around the fabric bar, bandages he'd wrapped. He studied her in the dim light of the wash. Dust clung to her hair, her dress torn, skin mottled with bruises. But her eyes, they still carried a spark. Whoever had left her to die hadn't snuffed it out. Well, he said at last, his voice steady, they were wrong. She looked at him then, really looked, as if she hadn't quite believed he was real until that moment. The canyon winds stirred above them, whispering through the empty sky. The drifter leaned back against the stone, eyes narrowing. He didn't know what kind of trouble Clara had been left in, but trouble had a way of spilling over onto any man who stood too close. Still, he knew one thing as certain as the dust on his boots. He wasn't about to walk away. The canyon wash was still, a hushed pocket of reprieve beneath the sun's burning gaze. Clara dozed against the stone wall, exhaustion finally tugging her into uneasy rest. The drifter sat a short distance away, one knee bent, his rifle laid across his lap. His eyes weren't on her, but on the narrow ribbon of sky above the wash, scanning for movement. He had lived too many years on the edge of the frontier not to recognize the weight in the air. Silence wasn't always safety. Sometimes silence meant something waited just beyond earshot. He rose slowly, walking the line of shade, boots crunching lightly in the sand. The wash showed more than shade. It showed tracks. Not his, not Clara's. Fresh prints, pressed deep in the soft dirt where the wash curved south, a set of hooves, sharp and distinct. He crouched, brushed his fingers over them, and judged them recent, a half-day old, maybe less. His jaw tightened. Riders had passed through, likely the same ones who had strung Clara up and left her to the canyon's mercy. He straightened, glancing back at her. She shifted in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't catch, a crease pulling between her brows. Even in rest, she looked haunted. The drifter returned to his place, lowering himself against the stone. His hand rested easy on the rifle, but his mind wasn't at ease. Whoever had done this to Clara would not stop with ropes and threats. Folks who tied a woman to die under the sky didn't leave loose ends. As the sun tilted west, the wash grew cooler. Shadows lengthened, creeping up the stone walls. Clara stirred awake, blinking, her throat dry. "You should drink," the drifter said, handing her the canteen again. She took it, drank carefully, then pressed the back of her hand against her lips. Her voice was steadier now. "You shouldn't have stayed. They'll come back." He tilted his head. "That who tied you?" Her gaze flicked to the wash's opening, wary, as though she half expected figures to appear at any moment. Men who don't forgive. Men who don't forget. The drifter studied her, the weight of her words pressing against him. "Why you?" She swallowed, her eyes falling to the bandages on her wrists. For a moment he thought she might answer, but then she shook her head, voice trembling. "Because I wouldn't do what they asked." He let the silence stretch, the riddle settling like dust in the canyon air. He didn't press her further. Instead, he stood, pulling his hat low against the sun. "We'll need to move before nightfall. This wash is a trap if they ride through again." Her eyes widened with fear. "Where will we go?" "North," he said simply. "Toward the high ground. There's cover up there, and I've got a camp stashed with enough supplies for a while." He extended his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her grip was weaker than his, but it held the strength of someone who had already refused to break, even when death had been dangling beneath her feet. They mounted the gelding again, Clara riding light in the saddle, the drifter leading them out of the wash. The canyon stretched wide before them, painted in red and gold as the day bled into evening. Behind them, the wash lay empty, but in the distance, faint and low, carried on the wind, came the sound of hoofbeats. The drifter froze, head cocked. Clara tensed in the saddle, eyes wide. "They found us," she whispered. The drifter's hand slid to the rifle on his shoulder. His voice was calm, steady as bedrock. "Then we keep moving." The sun had slipped low, casting long bands of shadow that stretched like claws across the canyon floor. The drifter pushed the gelding hard, guiding the animal along the narrow path that wound between rock outcroppings and dry creek beds. Clara clung to the saddle horn, every jolt rattling through her battered body, but she didn't complain. The hoofbeats behind them told her all she needed to know. The sound was closer now, 4, maybe 5 riders. Men who knew this land. Men who weren't afraid of the canyon swallowing them whole. The drifter's eyes cut to the jagged ridges ahead. "We can't outrun 'em long," he muttered under his breath. "Gotta make the land work for us." Clara, voice tight, asked, "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away, scanning the terrain. His gaze landed on a break in the canyon wall, a steep cut that climbed toward a plateau choked with brush and scattered pines. Dangerous ground for a horse, but cover if they made it. "Hold on," he said, digging his heels into the gelding's flanks. The horse surged forward, hooves scrambling against loose rock as they veered off the main trail. Behind them a shout rang out, angry, sharp, carried on the canyon wind. Then the chase quickened. Gunfire cracked, the sound echoing off stone, a bullet sparking against the wall just behind Clara's shoulder. She ducked with a startled cry, pressing herself flat against the horse's neck. The drifter didn't flinch, only leaned low, urging the gelding higher. Pebbles rattled down the slope as the animal clawed for footing, muscles bunching under strain. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The drifter swung his rifle from his shoulder, bracing it one-handed. Without slowing, he turned in the saddle and fired. The crack of his shot boomed, and a rider's horse screamed. The stumbling. Dust rose behind the men shouting curses. Clara lifted her head just enough to see. One rider was down, tangled in his mount. The others pressed harder, furious. "They're not stopping," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They don't get to," the drifter said flatly. The gelding crested the rise, lungs heaving, sweat darkening its coat. At the top, scrub pines bent in the wind, and the plateau spread out, a maze of gullies, rocks, and tangled brush. Perfect ground to disappear if you knew how. The drifter guided them into a narrow cut, branches snapping at their legs, shadows thickening as dusk pressed in. He slowed the gelding, letting its breathing steady, then dismounted quickly. "Off," he said. Clara blinked at him, confused. "What?" "Off the horse, now." She slid down, unsteady, nearly collapsing. He caught her elbow, steadying her. Then he slapped the gelding hard on the flank, sending it bolting through the brush. Its hoofbeats thundered away, drawing pursuit. Clara's eyes widened. "They'll hear it. Think we're still riding. That's the point." Already, the drifter was pulling her toward a cleft in the rock, narrow enough they had to turn sideways to slip through. The stone walls closed them in, cold and damp, and the air smelled of earth and pine sap. They crouched low, backs against the rock, listening. The sound of pursuit thundered past, riders shouting, horses crashing through brush, chasing the decoy trail. The hoofbeats faded into the distance, swallowed by the canyon's echoes. Only then did Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands trembled as she clutched the folds of his coat around her shoulders. The drifter watched the brush line, rifle ready, his breathing steady. He didn't look relieved, not yet. Men like those didn't give up easy. They'd circle back sooner or later. In the growing darkness, Clara whispered, "Why help me? You don't even know my name." The drifter's gaze stayed on the horizon, but his voice was quiet, rough with something unspoken. "Don't need your name to know you didn't deserve what they did." For a long moment, the canyon held nothing but the sound of the wind. Then Clara lowered her head, and for the first time since the rope had been around her neck, tears slid silently down her face. Not of fear this time, but of the strange, fragile safety she felt in his shadow. But safety was only for the moment. The hoofbeats would come again,